What's going on, guys? This is Bento with another Steam controller playtest, and I'm here with Bioshock Infinite. Out of all of the games in my library, and all the gin joints in all the world, I have to say Bioshock Infinite is, I think, at probably the #1 on my top games list. Just because, well, if I were to describe artwork for video games, I think Infinite is the embodiment of what art really should be in this, like, media. So really, going back to Infinite has been sort of a pleasure for me, but more so importantly, I wanted to show you guys some of the Steam controller capabilities it has with this game. So most notably, again, this is sort of an FPS game, so we do have our basic shooter premise, but with Bioshock Infinite, and what's very typical of Bioshock games is the fact that you have plasmids or vigors, and since this is Infinite, so you have a range of powers you can actually utilize against the enemies. So my control setup for Bioshock Infinite is very typical of how you'd see its control settings for the console, except I do have a lot of drastic changes for the Steam controller. So very typical, right trigger is to shoot, left trigger is to use plasmids, vigors in this case. Right trackpad is movement as usual, except for the actual clicking of the trackpad, I'm using the touch menu shift mode in order to select the vigors on the fly. So if you don't already know, the touch menu consists of a bunch of numbers. So you can set that number to be specific keys on a keyboard. In most cases, I would usually just have it to set the numerical keys of like 1 through 0, or 1 through 9 then 0. So in this case, switching vigors and choosing vigors becomes a lot easier, and I don't have to select the radio wheel for the vigors. But I do have the radio wheel just in case, but having ease of access just makes things a lot more fluid. Since I turned off the opacity because I just didn't want the numerical pad interfering with my I guess my visual input, and so it's really easy to get used to it if you kind of know how to if you memorize where the numbers are on the trackpad. So as for everything else, the face buttons are also typical of the controller settings for the consoles. So Y is actually for me to melee, B, I believe I have it on crouch, A is to jump, and X is to interact. I also have these on the left and right grip buttons. Left is to crouch and right is to jump. I just have those on the face settings because really just in case I forget what control does what. But if you get used to the left and right grip buttons, then it becomes I'd say it's a lot easier. And the whole reason I have jump and crouch on the left and right grips is because I think it's a lot better for players to be able to keep their right thumb on the trackpad while aiming and shooting. That way you don't have to sacrifice some camera movement in order to, well, essentially, since, for example, if you have buttons for crouch and jumping on the face buttons, but you have grips to do that, then you essentially take out the need to remove the aim. So that way you can just focus on aiming and utilize the grips to jump and maneuver properly. But that's just me. I mean, you can obviously, it's not that big of a hindrance in my opinion, but it's something to work with, and I feel like it adds a little more precision to the aiming of the game. The left trackpad is actually just emulates a D-pad. So the up gives me the objective markers. Left actually switches vigors on the fly. So if I want to switch between my previous vigor and, well, just the previous vigor. The right also switches between your two weapons. The down D on the D-pad, or the trackpad, is to activate the voxophones, or I guess like the radio. I think it's called voxophones. It's been a while. But so anytime you need to listen, you just basically just press down. Left thumb pad, or yeah, left thumbstick is essentially just your movement. Nothing out of the ordinary there. To click it means to sprint. And lastly, I actually included a motion control support. So again, just for that finer aiming and be able to properly get from one target to the other. So that's pretty much it. Although I actually have one notable thing with the shooting actually. So I am using a dual trigger mode for shooting and aiming. So the soft trigger pull action is actually my aiming, while the hard trigger pull action is to shoot. So if some of you who don't have the Steam controller basically what this means is there's two types of pulling with the triggers. One will do the soft pull and the other will do the hard pull. So like, for example, just pulling the trigger all the way. And what I like with this is the fact that you can have dual functions for this. So I think this is really good for Bioshock Infinite because typically your left trigger is always your vigor, and aiming is sort of like somewhere else. In fact, I think on the keyboard it was Z, and I believe it was click right thumbstick for the console settings. But unlike typical shooters where left trigger is to aim, Bioshock really needs you to use your vigors because it's a core part of combat, it's a core part of the game. In fact, it's pretty much what makes Bioshock really unique. So aiming is kind of secondary to most of your combat. But for some it is, because maybe you want to snipe, maybe you need to aim down better. So by having these dual trigger functions, you get to include that in your core gameplay as well. But you don't have to sacrifice. Not only do you not have to sacrifice functionality, but you can also allow more options for other buttons as well. It was hard to get used to at first because just out of habit, sometimes I'm not used to having dual trigger functions, because like say on the Xbox or the PlayStation, you freely just shoot however you need to by pulling the trigger all the way. So getting used to that amount of pressure you need to use is something to really fine tune. But luckily there's enough functions in the Steam controller settings that allow you to maybe reduce the trigger time, increase the trigger time depending on your preference. So there's a lot of customizability there. So really, if you need to, you can. And I am using a controller and mouse combo because I feel like the mouse aiming is what really works with the Steam controller. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. The left stick, just because I like the added speed functionality you have with how far you press the left thumbstick. The one issue with this game, though, is the fact that whenever the game gives tooltips on, like, say, how to pick up items or how to get on the skyline, or the sky rail, I believe. I forget what it's called. Sometimes it'll tell you to press A, it'll tell you to press F, it'll tell you to press X or spacebar. So it can be an issue there, but honestly it's not really that big of a deal unless you're OCD about it, which you surely shouldn't be. But that's probably the only issue I've faced so far. Overall, the controls felt pretty good. Since I've had a lot of practice with other FPS games, my gameplay with Bioshock is a little better than most. I think it probably still sucks because I'm still like in training, but I definitely feel a lot more comfortable using this controller for FPS games than I typically would for a normal controller setup or a normal console controller setup. I think Bioshock is a good example of some of the games you can use for the touch menu because, like I said, you have all these vigors to choose from, and plus it just makes it more fluid than having to select the radio wheel. Obviously that's all the preference because, again, I'm using a hybrid controller and mouse keyboard setup. A little less on the keyboard, but actually it's pretty equal. But you can always go back to the radio wheel. I mean, that's usually really helpful because you can stop time and assess the situation. But if I really need to just be in the moment of in the heat of battle, I just like that I don't have to take breaks or interrupt the flow of combat, essentially. One little nitpick I've actually had with selecting the touch menu as a double click for the right trackpad is that anytime I do try to select a power or try to select a gun in this FPS game, and I think I've actually tried it with Half-Life 2 and another FPS game or other FPS games, when I do select the power, when I do select the gun, the screen sort of shakes a little because I have track motion on, and so it's a little nitpick, but it's not too bad. If it does kind of irritate you, you can always put the shift mode to either the grips, the triggers, or the bumpers. Oh, and speaking of which, I actually have my right bumper as the reload and the left bumper as the vigor select, in case I forgot to mention. I like having reload on the right bumper. I forget what game it actually introduced it. I think it might have been Halo. And like I said, because I don't really want to keep my thumb off the thumbstick or the trackpad in this case, so I can always aim. So it's nice that having the right bumper as reload is pretty convenient for me. I forgot how gory this game can be sometimes with the head explosions. But Bioshock Infinite is, without a doubt, my almost all-time favorite game. I haven't really found anything that's topped it yet because it's just a work of art, really, is what it is. So that's pretty much it, guys. Overall, again, I think this Steam controller worked really well with Bioshock Infinite. If you have it, I think it's worth playing again. It's always good practice if you want to mess or tinker with some of the other Steam controller functionalities. That's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.